How does a DSLR work? DSLR is it for me? Is it easy to use?
Well, if you had all those queries stopping you from buying a DSLR and unleashing your creativity, we are here to help you. I am Rohan from Nikon India technical team. We at Nikon have always believed in nurturing the photography talent and providing our customers a great photography experience. We have an array of options like Nikon school workshops, photo walks, outdoor workshops. And now taking it a step forward, we bring to you Nikon School DSLR tutorials. Through the course of these tutorials, we will be talking about the basics of photography, which will help aspiring photographers strengthen their photography skills. The first session talks about DSLR advantages and why should one own a DSLR. At the same time, we share with you some important facts as well as try and answer some common myths about photography. I would like to introduce to you Abhishek, my colleague from the Nikon India technical team. Abhishek, we get a lot of questions from our customers asking about why should one buy a DSLR camera. You know, they think it's complex and difficult to use, and why should actually one invest in a DSLR?
Ron, I tell you, most of the people who want to upgrade from a compact camera to a DSLR have this question that DSLR is a very complex machine. But if you actually use a DSLR or if you actually get a demonstration of a DSLR, you will find that it's the most simplest machine to understand in terms of photography. Now, we have prepared a small animation piece which will help you and customers to understand that how actually DSLR functions.
Great.
Once you understand that, even it is very helpful for people who own a DSLR right now. That will give a very clear picture to these DSLR owners as well as the people who want to upgrade to a new DSLR, that how it works, so that they can get the best output from your DSLR. Now, here we have an animation piece that shows a subject under the influence of light. Now, normally we say if you want to record any picture, you require light for that particular picture. If you don't have light, you cannot grab a picture. Here we have used sun as a natural source of light hitting the subject. Now, from the subject, light travels through the lens, hits a mirror inside the camera. Now, if you see closely, there is a mirror inside this camera. Can you see that?
Yes.
Now, light hits this mirror, get reflected onto the prism which is right on the top of the DSLR, and then further travels to the viewfinder.
That's how we view the image.
Exactly, that's how you view the image. Now, in order to shoot an image, what you do is you first look through the viewfinder, set the exposure mode, could be any auto mode like macro, portrait, sports, or some of the auto exposure modes like manual, then your aperture priority, shutter priority, programmed auto, these kind of modes. You set the right exposure, then you press the shutter release button here. When you press this button, the mirror goes up and the light directly travels to the image sensor, and that's how image gets recorded on your memory card.
So that was about the working of a DSLR camera. Abhishek, come let's discuss a few advantages of DSLRs.
Of course, Rohan, the most important advantage of a DSLR is that you can change lenses. Now, what happens when you change a lens? So, you can change the lens to get various different kind of perspectives. Like if you want to shoot a portrait, you get a very good low lighting lens like a 50mm 1.8, which is a fixed focal length. Fixed focal length means you have a fixed focal length in terms of zoom.
So, you cannot zoom in or zoom out.
Since it's a low lighting performance lens, it's a fixed focal length. Now, here I have a new Nikon D5300 camera mounted with 18 140mm lens. Now, this lens is a zoom lens which starts from 18mm wide angle and goes up to 140mm.
Wow.
Right. So, you can actually change the perspective even without changing the lenses by just zooming into the subject, depending on the situation. Like if you are shooting a wildlife, most of the wildlife photographers prefer to have high focal length of 500mm, 600mm, because that's the situation and condition they want to shoot in.
So, you can change the look and feel of the shot.
Exactly. Now, we have an example here. If you could look at the image here, the first image shows a zoomed in view of a landscape.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the same landscape, if we just zoom out to wide angle perspective, you get it altogether different perspective.
Yes, this is completely changed.
So, one lens is offering you two different perspective of the same subject. So, that is the major advantage of having a DSLR.
So, you can zoom in, zoom out, and by that you can change the perspective and look of the
Exactly,
scene.
exactly. And depending on the kind of subject you are shooting, you can opt for various other lenses we have in our lineup. And as you know, Nikon lenses are world famous for their quality.
What could be other advantages that we could share with our viewers?
See, DSLR, people normally go for a DSLR for high image quality. Now, when we talk about high image quality, that is possible because of the sensor size of the DSLR. Now, we have DSLR starting from 24 megapixel, 36 megapixel, D800 is a 36 megapixel camera. Now, that high resolution gives you the highest quality possible. Now, you will say, Rohan, even some of the smart devices today are having, you know, high megapixel of 20 megapixel,
Correct,
34 megapixel. But that megapixel, that image quality is totally different from what quality is offered by your DSLR, because the DSLR sensor is very big as compared to the sensor deployed in these smart devices.
I'm sure our viewers will love this tip because they always have this apprehension about why not use a smart device, why go
Exactly.
in for a DSLR when you get the same megapixels.
Let me tell you, a 8 megapixel DSLR will always give you a better quality image compared to any other smart device, even if the smart device is 16 megapixel or 20 megapixel, just because the sensor size of the DSLR is very big. Now, to explain that, I have an image here on the screen. You can see this image. This is a portrait shot taken at Ladakh at Khardungla Pass. Now, if you see closely, if you crop this image more than 50%, and you can see the cropped version of this image, you can still retain all those details and
Correct.
sharpness in the image. This is because of the image sensor deployed in a DSLR. This is not possible with any other smart device that is capable of taking an image.
Okay, so that is indeed a great advantage.
Exactly.
So, you can blow this picture up also?
You
too?
can actually print this image. This is a high quality print image. You can print this image A4, A3 or even on canvas.
Wow, that is a great advantage to have in a DSLR. So, those were advantages, some very important advantages of DSLRs. What could be another very critical advantage that could be of help to our users, DSLR users?
Ron, most of the people, they have a lot of complaint that when they shoot in low lighting situation, image appears very dark. And that happens with all the imaging devices, but not with DSLRs. So, if you have a good DSLR with a CMOS sensor deployed in it, which is a very high quality sensor, now in these kind of situation, you can actually click an image where there is very minimum light.
That is possible.
Yes. Now, here is an image. You can see this image. This image has been shot at Pangong Lake in Ladakh at around 11 PM at night. Now, you can see stars on the sky and there is a pretty well lit up landscape in the background, Now, you can even see the shadows of the flag. The light that what you see on your screen in the image is not an artificial light.
That was going to be my next question, because you said Ladakh and Pangong. I don't think there are street lights there.
There are no street lights there, there are no bulbs there.
And this is a well lit image.
Yeah, and flash cannot give this kind of output, right? So, you have this light which is a moonlight.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
So,
This
what
is
we have
wonderful.
done is we have just mounted a camera on a tripod and exposed the camera for a longer duration for say around 30 seconds. And we used a remote to click this image. You can see the quality of the image, you can see the landscape, you can see the mountains, the mountain range. And if you are there actually at night, you won't be able to see anything, it's pitch dark.
But in this image, we can clearly see and even, kind of make out the texture of the mountains and in the image what kind of a rocky landscape it would have been.
Exactly, and the only light available there was the moonlight. So, this is the kind of quality offered by a DSLR. This cannot be matched by any other imaging device, be it smart device or your cell phones or mobile phones.
Abhishek, that was great information about the low light capability of our cameras. But somewhere while explaining the image, you mentioned that you used a remote to take the image. Can you shed some light for the benefit of our viewers on the accessories that our DSLRs come with?
Ron, see, we've spoken about the kind of lenses you can use in various kind of situations. We have wide variety of Nikon lenses, high quality Nikon lenses. If you are a wildlife photographer, as I said, you have big zoom lenses, 500 mm, 600 mm, and recently we introduced 800 mm in our lineup. Along with that, we have very good low lighting performance lens like 50 mm, which is very good for portraits and products. We have 35 mm. We have very wide angle lenses like 14-24, 16 mm fisheye. So depending on the kind of subject you are shooting, you can actually opt for various lenses. Now, apart from lenses, as you mentioned, remotes. Remote is just one accessory that one can opt for while shooting in low lighting situation. Remotes are very helpful when you want to trigger your camera remotely, because at times when you are shooting in extremely low lighting situation, you have to pull down your shutter speed really slow. In those kind of situation, even touching the shutter release button might give you image blur.
So you mean to say camera can shake and
exactly.
cause the image?
So you can use remote in those situations. So that is the utility of having a remote. Then we have wireless mobile adapters, which can get fixed in the USB port of a DSLR, and then you can wirelessly transfer your images from the camera to any smart devices. That could be Android based or that could be iOS based device.
So that gives us the capability of sharing it with our loved ones on social networking sites.
Exactly. And if you are very fond of utilizing the full HD video capability of our DSLR, we also have a high quality sound recorder that is called ME1 microphone. So you can actually record high quality sound with that microphone. We have GPS devices, we have external flash guns, SB910, these are some of very great flash that can illuminate any low lighting situation. So endless accessories and endless possibilities and endless advantages of having a DSLR.
Great, Abhishek. So I'm sure all our viewers would agree after listening to all these advantages and will have no apprehensions going in for a DSLR camera. We thank you for watching this session and we hope you enjoyed it. In the further sessions, we are going to talk about basics of photography, where we talk about exposure, we talk about composition, and we talk about focus. Stay tuned for some more informative sessions. Until then, these are your Nikon buddies, Rohan and Abhishek, signing off. Thank you.
My images are overexposed. What is f number? What is the effect of changing f number?
If you have all those queries and questions, we will help you fine-tune the camera exposure to get the desired result. Welcome everyone to Nikon DSLR tutorial. As in the last session, we discussed about the advantages of DSLRs and how you can make use of your DSLRs. In this episode, we'll be talking about exposure, which is the basis of creating good images. Now, in this episode, we'll discuss the concepts about analyzing the light and how you can make use of light to get a properly exposed image. Let's talk about exposure. Exposure technically is based on three parameters, that is aperture, shutter speed and ISO. If we define exposure, exposure is basically allowing just enough light onto the light sensitive medium to ensure the subject is captured with the same level of illumination as it is. So when we talk about light sensitive medium in DSLR, the light sensitive medium is your camera image sensor. So let's have a look at these three images. The first image that you see is over bright image. Technically we call it as overexposed image. The second image that you see is a dark image. Technically we call it as underexposed image. The third image that you see is properly exposed image, and technically we call it as balanced exposure. Talking about the first image, which is an overexposed image. Now let's see how to identify an overexposed image. As you can see from the image, the brighter part of the image, that is the clouds, have been blown out. All the details in the clouds have been blown out. That means an overexposed image shows you as if the brighter part of the image have been blown out and there are no details in the brighter section of the image. That is what we call an overexposed image. It is also very easy to identify underexposed images. As you can see from this image, there are no details in the shadow part of the image. This is what we call an underexposed image. Let us now talk about a balanced exposed image. Here is a perfect example of balanced exposure, wherein you can see the details in the brighter part of the image as well as the darker part of the image. This is what we call a balanced exposed image. At the beginning of this session, we spoke about exposure is based on three components: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Let's talk about aperture and understand how it works. Aperture is basically a mechanism to control light entering the lens, similar to human iris diaphragm. To make you understand aperture in a better way, I have this Nikon 35mm DX lens, which is a very good low lighting lens. Now if you take out this lens and if you see from the back side of the lens, you'll see a small lever. So in order to see the aperture blades inside the lens, what you can do is you can just push this lever and you will see aperture getting widened up. This is what we call aperture of the lens. So here you have a narrow aperture and here you have a wider aperture. Comparing aperture with human iris diaphragm is very easy. Now when you move inside a cinema hall or a dark theater, initially you don't see anything, everything is pitch dark, and after some time the human eye pupil expands so that it can absorb more light. Similarly, when you move out from a darker situation to a brighter situation, the pupil contracts. The same principle is implemented on a camera lens, which is called aperture. Basically, aperture performs two roles. One, it controls exposure, and second, it controls the depth of field. Coming to the first role of aperture, that is exposure, here is an image which has been shot in low lighting situation. Now in this kind of situation, you require your aperture to be wide open. So that means you require wider aperture if you are shooting in low lighting conditions. Let's see another example of how aperture controls exposure. Here is an image that has been shot in bright daylight situation. Now in this kind of situation, you don't require a wider aperture. So small aperture is what is required in brightly lit situation to get properly exposed image. Let's talk about another role of aperture, that is controlling the depth of field. Here is an image in which you can see the foreground as well as the background both are defocused. This is because we have used a wider aperture here. As you can see in the image, the subject, that is the white horse, is in focus and crisp, sharp, whereas the foreground as well as the background both are defocused. This has been achieved by making the aperture wide open. Keeping the same subject and the same image, if you just keep your aperture small, you will see the foreground as well as the background both will be crisp, sharp. Hence, if you want foreground as well as the background in focus and sharp, you should have a small aperture. How to identify small or wider aperture? Aperture is basically denoted by f number. Smaller f number means wider aperture. Greater f number means smaller aperture. Let's refer this chart to understand aperture in a better manner. Here we have various f numbers starting from f1.4 to 2.8 and further to f22. Now, as you can see from the reference images, the first image that has been shot at f1.4 is an overexposed image because this f number was too wide in the given lighting situation. As we keep on increasing the f number further to 2.8, the outcome is still better, but it's again an overexposed image. You keep on increasing the f number, you keep on making the aperture smaller and smaller. So f5.6 is what that gives us a balanced exposed image. You keep on increasing the f number further, you will get a darker output. So depending on the lighting situation, you decide what kind of f number you should have while shooting an image. Let's see how to change f number in your camera. Here I have a Nikon D3200 mounted with 18105mm kit lens. Now on the lens itself, you'll see some markings stating 3.5 to 5.6. What does this mean? This means when you are at wide angle 18mm, the widest aperture you will get is 3.5, and when you zoom the lens to 105mm, the widest aperture you will get is 5.6. Now in order to make use of it, you have to switch your camera to A mode and start rotating the command dial. As you keep on rotating the command dial, you will see the aperture at 3.5 gives you a wider aperture opening. And you keep on increasing the f number, your aperture starts becoming smaller and smaller. So at f22, probably you will have the smallest aperture. As we discussed, aperture controls both exposure as well as the depth of field. Now let's see some of the example that will give you a brief idea about what f number shall we use in what kind of situations. Here is an image which is a landscape shot. Normally in landscape we require both foreground as well as background crisp sharp. Now in order to do that, you should have a higher f number, of course depending on the lighting situation, so that you can get a small aperture. Now if you are looking for those cinematic effect wherein the background is totally defocused, or technically speaking we have a shallow depth of field. Now in order to achieve shallow depth of field, your aperture should be wide open. f4 gives you a lot of liberty to make your background totally detached from your foreground or subject. Thank you for watching this tutorial. We hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. In next session, we will be talking about another element of exposure which is called shutter speed. Until next time, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.
How can I capture a fast-moving subject? Why do my images blur when I shoot in low light? How do I get a softer, milky effect in flowing water?
If you have all these queries and questions, this session will answer all of them. Welcome everyone to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. As we discussed in previous session about exposure and the elements of exposure, that is aperture, let's discuss another element of exposure which is called shutter speed. Now what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is mechanism to control light entering the image sensor of your camera. Now shutter speed basically controls the duration of light hitting the camera image sensor. Here you can see in this animation wherein the shutter is not open until and unless you press the shutter release button. Once you press the shutter release button, the light passes through the lens and hits the image sensor, and that's how the image gets recorded in your camera. Now in order to make you understand how shutter speed works in your camera, I have this Nikon D3200 camera. You just have to look here. As you can see just the mirror here because I have not pressed the shutter release button. Once I press the shutter release button, you will see the shutter goes up and you can see the image sensor. That means the light is hitting the image sensor directly. Moving ahead in exposure, shutter speed controls two elements. One, it controls light, and second, it controls the subject movement. To make you understand how shutter speed controls the exposure, let's see some of the examples. Now here is an image. As you can see, this image is pretty dark because it has been shot at 1/200th of a second shutter speed. Now this kind of shutter speed is quite high in the provided lighting situation. Now in this kind of lighting situation, let's see if we slow down the shutter speed to 1/20th of a second. Now this is the output you get at slow shutter speed. So we arrive at a conclusion wherein in low lighting situation you require to shoot at slow shutter speeds. Another example of how shutter speed controls exposure. Here you can see an image that is overexposed. Reason being, it has been shot at a very slow shutter speed. Now in this kind of shutter speed, the camera is exposed to light for a longer duration. Hence you get overexposed output every time you shoot at in a very brightly lit situation. Now if we further increase the shutter speed to 1/500th of a second, you will see you will get a very balanced exposed image. Hence we should use higher shutter speed in brightly lit situations. Coming to another role of shutter speed, that is controlling the subject movement. Here is an image that shows a high speed car. Now in order to freeze that kind of subject, you need to shoot at a very high shutter speed. Now this shot has been taken at 1/1200th of a second. So if you want to freeze the subject, you need to increase your shutter speed depending on the speed of the subject. If you shoot this subject at a slower shutter speed of say 1/40th of a second, now when you shoot at such a slow shutter speed, you can actually show motion in your image. In order to do that, you need to slow down the shutter speed and follow the subject. Now, how to identify slow and fast shutter speed? Shutter speed is normally denoted in seconds or fraction of a second. Now, slow shutter speed means the shutter will open for a longer duration, that means more light will enter in the image sensor. Wherein the faster shutter speed means shutter will drop at a very high speed and less light will hit the image sensor. Here we have a chart that depicts various shutter speed starting from 30 seconds and going up to 1/4000 of a second. In certain high-end cameras, this shutter speed can even go up to 1/8000 of a second. Now, if you see this scale, starting from 30 seconds till 1/60th of a second is what we technically consider as slow shutter speed. Slow shutter speed means more light, better in low lighting situation. Now, starting from shutter speed 1/125th of a second and moving ahead to 1/4000 of a second is what we consider faster shutter speed. That means they are good in freezing the motion as well as in brightly lit situations. Now, let's see with the help of some of the examples that what kind of shutter speed you should keep in what kind of situations. If you want to show those milky effect and motion effect on flowing water, you should shoot it at a slow shutter speed. Now, moving ahead, if you are shooting your daily kind of activities like somebody walking, talking, sitting, in these kind of situation you should follow standard shutter speed ranging from 1/60th of a shutter speed to 1/125th of a second. Now, if you are shooting something that is moving very fast, you have to pull your shutter speed at a high speed. Now, in order to change the shutter speed in this camera, first go to S mode. Once you go to S mode, you have to rotate the command dial. As you keep on rotating the command dial, you will see the shutter speed is changing in the interface of the camera. As we have already discussed how to freeze the subject by increasing the shutter speed. Now, in this example, we will tell you that how slower shutter speed are very useful in low lighting situation. Now, this image has been shot at a very slow shutter speed. Hence, slow shutter speed are very good in low lighting situation. Here is another example of how you can show motion effect on waterfall or flowing water at a very slow shutter speed. So, if you want to show any kind of motion, you have to shoot it in slower shutter speed. But always remember that when you are shooting in slower shutter speed, you have to stabilize your camera on a tripod or any kind of stabilizing surface. Otherwise, it might generate camera shake, which results in image blur. We thank you for watching this session of Nikon DSLR tutorial. In the next session, we will be talking about relationship between shutter speed and aperture. Until next time, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.
How can I control exposure without modifying the aperture? How can I balance between aperture and shutter speed? What is ISO?
If you have question how shutter speed and aperture works together, this session will answer that question. Welcome all of you to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. In this session, we will be talking about relationship between shutter speed and aperture. Now, here is an image that has been shot at 1/60th of a second shutter speed and aperture f5.6. Now, you can see the overall exposure of the image is pretty decent, as well as you can see the background is slightly defocused. Now, if your intention is to bring more background in focus, you have to increase the f number, making the aperture further smaller. Once you do that, you will see the image will be underexposed. Reason being, you are cutting the amount of light entering the image sensor. Now, in order to compensate that, the second aspect that you need to change in your camera is the shutter speed. You need to slow down the shutter speed in order to increase the duration of light entering the image sensor. Now, once you slow down the shutter speed to 1/15th of a second and keep the same aperture, that is f11, you will see you will get more background in focus. That means you will have a greater depth of field and the same exposure as the first image. Now, let us take the same image again. Here you can see an image wherein the background is slightly defocused. Now if you want to defocus the background furthermore or want a very good shallow depth of field, you need a wider aperture. Now you need a wider aperture, that means you need smaller f number. Smaller f number of f2.8 is good enough to give you a very good shallow depth of field. Hence at shutter speed 1/60th of a second and aperture f2.8, you will see you will get a very good shallow depth of field, but the exposure is overexposed. Now in order to compensate that, what you need to do is you need to increase the shutter speed. Hence you will see you will get a good shallow depth of field with a properly exposed image. As we have discussed the two components of exposure, that is aperture and shutter speed, now let us discuss the third component of exposure, which is called ISO. ISO is basically responsiveness of sensor towards light. Now ISO setting can be changed in order to achieve much more brighter output without even changing the shutter speed and aperture. Now let us see how ISO works. Here you can see an image which is very dark. Now if you want to achieve an output which is bright without even changing the shutter speed and aperture or without even using a flash, you can actually increase the various numbers of ISO in the camera settings. Now these number in some cameras starts from 50, in some cameras it starts from 100 and goes up to 3200, 6400 and in high end bodies to 25600. Now as you increase these numbers, you will see you tend to increase the brightness of the image. Now as we explained to you earlier, the relationship between shutter speed and aperture and how these two elements can combine together to get you a properly exposed image. Now if you don't want to change shutter speed and aperture but yet want a proper exposed image, let's see how ISO helps in that. Now here is an image that has been shot at 1/60th of a second with aperture f5.6. Now in order to get more background in focus, the element that we will change in our camera would be aperture. So we increase the f number to f11 so that we get a smaller aperture. Once we do that, the image tends to appear underexposed. Now in order to balance the exposure, what we will do is we will simply increase the ISO number to 800. So that we get a very good exposed photograph without even changing the shutter speed or aperture. Now let us see some of the examples of various ISO settings. These settings will tell you in what kind of situation what kind of ISO number can be used. In brightly lit situations, especially in daylight, ISO 100 can give you good output. In shade situation wherein your subject is under the influence of shade, ISO 200 will be sufficient enough to give you great output. If you are shooting something that is moving very fast in the outdoor, ISO 400 may be sufficient to grab a good exposure. If you are shooting some stage activity or some kind of stage show, ISO 800 is sufficient enough to give you great output. Similarly, if you are shooting in a very low lighting situation, especially at night, ISO 1600 can give you very good output. Now if you are shooting something that is in very low lighting situation wherein there is no light, then ISO 3200 or more can give you better output. Now let me just give you a brief idea about relationship between ISO and shutter speed. Higher ISO ensures faster response towards light, hence faster shutter speed can be used. Now why you want to use faster shutter speed? In order to freeze the subject. Now in order to freeze the subject, once you increase the shutter speed, you will notice that image tends to appear underexposed as shown onto your screen. Now in order to compensate that underexposure, you need to increase the ISO to correct the exposure. So you boost the ISO number to get properly exposed image. Now you might ask me a question, why not we use higher ISO always? To answer that, lowest possible ISO given by your camera is the best output in that particular ISO. That means if you are shooting at ISO 100 or 200, the image quality that comes in that particular ISO would be far more better than the ISO used 3200 or 6400. Now at 3200 or 6400, you might see noise and grains on the image. Now to make you understand in a better way, let's have a look at various images shot at different ISO settings. ISO 200, ISO 400, till ISO 1600 you won't see any kind of noise or grains on the image. That means the image quality is simply impeccable. But when you increase the ISO to 3200 or to further 6400, you might see little bit of grains and noise on the image. If you intend to print an image canvas size and exhibit your image, we recommend to you to shoot at the lowest ISO possible. We thank you for watching this session of Nikon DSLR tutorial, and we hope you enjoyed the session. In the next session, we will be talking about various exposure control modes like aperture priority auto, shutter priority auto and programmed auto. Until next time, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.
How do I tune my DSLR for different lighting conditions? How can I play with depth of field quickly? How can I capture portraits with a soft blur background?
If you have all these queries and questions, this session will answer all of them. Welcome everyone to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorial. Now in this session, we will be talking about various exposure control modes. Let's start with aperture priority auto mode. Now if you intend to have good shallow depth of field in your portraits, as well as if you intend to have greater depth of field while shooting a landscape wherein you want foreground as well as the background crisp sharp, this is the right mode to go for. Now in order to shoot in aperture priority auto mode, you need to switch your camera to A mode. Once you switch your camera to A mode, you just need to rotate the command dial and the back side of the camera. Now this dial will help you change the f number. Now in this mode, camera automatically will adjust the shutter speed, so you don't have to worry about the shutter speed. As I told you, in A mode, camera gives the shutter speed automatically and you have the liberty to change the aperture. But in case you are not satisfied with the exposure given by the camera, you can actually override the exposure by using this plus minus button. This plus minus button is called exposure compensation button. By pressing this button and then rotating the command dial towards plus size, you can actually brighten up your images. Similarly, if you rotate the command dial towards negative side, you can actually make your images underexposed. Let's have a look at some of the images shot in aperture priority auto mode. Now here is an image that gives you very shallow depth of field at aperture f2.8. Now at this wide aperture, the depth of field is very shallow. You don't have to worry about shutter speed when you are in A mode. If you want a greater depth of field, you need to increase your f number because you want both background as well as foreground in focus, crisp, sharp. So f11 will give you a very good depth of field. Moving ahead, if you want a very good greater depth of field, you can further increase the f number to f18 if the lighting condition is very good. In this case also, you don't have to worry about the shutter speed. Thank you for watching this session of Nikon DSLR tutorial. We hope you enjoyed this session. In the next session, we will be talking about shutter priority auto mode. Until then, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.
How can I capture stunning sports images without worrying about exposure? Which mode should I use to capture high-speed subjects? How can I play with slow shutter speed?
If you have all these queries and questions, this session will answer all of them. Welcome everyone to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorial. In our last session, we spoke about aperture priority auto mode, that is A mode. In this session, we will be talking about S mode, that is shutter priority auto mode. Now when you want to freeze a fast moving subject or you want to show any kind of motion, especially the star trails or light trails, or you want to show those milky waterfalls, then S mode is the right mode to shoot in. In order to shoot in S mode, you have to first rotate the mode dial to S. Once you do that, you have to rotate the command dial to change the shutter speed. Now in S mode, camera gives you the liberty to change the shutter speed, wherein aperture is adjusted by the camera automatically as per the available light. Now, as I told you, in S mode, camera gives you the liberty to change the shutter speed, wherein aperture is adjusted automatically by the camera. Now, if in case you are not satisfied with the exposure given by your camera, you can actually override the exposure by pressing this plus minus button. This button is known as exposure compensation button. Now, in order to brighten up your images, you just need to press this button and rotate the command dial towards the positive side. This will brighten up your images. In order to underexpose your images, you again need to press this button and rotate the command dial towards the negative side. Now, let's have a look at some of the examples that are shot in S mode. Here is the first example. You see this image of a boy moving. Now, in order to freeze this subject, you have to have a higher shutter speed. In this subject, the shutter speed is close to 1/400 of a second, so that we can actually freeze the motion. In the second example, the subject is moving fast towards the camera. Now, in this case, you again need to have a higher shutter speed in order to freeze the subject. Here the shutter speed chosen is 1/400 of a second. Now, as you can see in the image, this image has been shot in a very low lighting situation. In this kind of situation, you need to expose the image sensor towards light for a longer duration. Hence, we have chosen a very slow shutter speed of 4 seconds. Here is one more example of slow shutter speed. Now, in order to show a milky effect or a flowing effect on a waterfall, you need to use a slow shutter speed. Here we have used 1/15th of a second shutter speed to show this effect. Now, always remember, in this kind of situation, you need to stabilize your camera or mount a camera on a tripod in order to avoid image blur. That was all about shutter priority auto mode. Thank you for watching this session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. In the next session, we will be talking about programmed auto mode. Until next time, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.
Which mode can I use other than auto? How can I take a picture without worrying about exposure? How P mode is different from auto mode?
If you have all these queries and questions, this session will answer all of them. Welcome everyone to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorial. Now, in this session, we will be talking about programmed auto mode, which is called P mode. Now, when to use P mode? P mode is the best solution when you want to just focus on the composition part of your photography. You don't have to worry about setting the shutter speed or the aperture. Just rotate the dial to P mode and point your camera towards the subject and shoot. In this mode, camera gives you the combination of shutter speed and aperture. In case you are not satisfied with the exposure given by the camera, you can actually override the exposure by using this plus minus button. This plus minus button is called exposure compensation button. By pressing this button and then rotating the command dial towards plus size, you can actually brighten up your images. Similarly, if you rotate the command dial towards negative side, you can actually make your images underexposed. Now, P mode is a very unique mode which gives you the liberty to focus just on your composition. In P mode, as I told you, camera gives you the combination of shutter speed and aperture. It should not be confused with the auto mode. In P mode, you have the liberty to change ISO, white balance, and also flash is under your control, wherein in auto mode, flash is not under your control. Flash will pop up whenever the camera feels the necessity of light. Also, options like ISO, white balance, etc. are completely disabled in auto mode. That was all about programmed auto mode. Thank you for watching this session of Nikon DSLR tutorial. In the next session, my colleague Rohan will speak to you about focusing. So stay tuned. Until next time, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.
How can I use all the focusing modes in my camera? My image is perfectly exposed, yet not sharp. Why? My images are getting blurred even if I'm using a tripod.
Hello everybody, welcome to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. In the previous session, we spoke about various auto exposure modes. In this session, we will be talking about focus. What is focus? Focus is actually adjusting the distance of your subject from the lens. Focus ensures that your main subject appears sharp in an image. Well, you would want to ask me now, how do we achieve focus on the camera? There are two ways. One is manual focus and the other is autofocus. In manual focus, we manually move the focusing ring on the lens to achieve focus, that is fixing the distance between the lens to the subject. In autofocus, when we press the shutter button halfway down, the lens automatically detects the distance and achieves focus. Now, autofocus further has two different parts, which is focus modes and focus area modes. To understand autofocus better, let's have a look at this example. Now, as we mentioned earlier, autofocus can be achieved by pressing the shutter button halfway down. The photographer here has the liberty to choose whether the camera locks focus or it continues to adjust while the shutter button is pressed. The function that sets this behavior in the camera is known as focus mode. Now, focus mode has three different components: AFS, AFC and AFA. In the AFS or single servo autofocus mode, it is generally used for stationary subjects. Focus locks when the shutter button is pressed halfway and the shutter can only be released if the camera is able to focus. This mode also gives you the liberty of recomposing your scene after the focus is locked. Coming to the AFC or continuous servo autofocus mode, this mode is used for moving subjects. The camera focuses continuously while the shutter button is pressed halfway. If the subject moves, the camera will engage predictive focus tracking to predict the final distance to the subject and adjust the focus as necessary. At default settings, the shutter can only be released if the camera is able to focus. In AFA, which is the auto servo autofocus mode, the camera automatically selects single servo autofocus if the subject is stationary and continuous servo autofocus if the subject is moving. The shutter can only be released if the camera is able to focus. Now, you would like to keep in mind that when you are unable to decide which mode to choose, that is between AFS or AFC, you can go ahead and choose AFA mode. An advantage of the AFA mode is it helps you when you are confused between choosing the AFS or AFC mode. The AFA mode automatically switches between the two depending on the subject movement and maintains crisp focus. Now, let us see how to change the focus modes on your camera. First, press the I button on your camera to bring up the shooting information display. Now, choose the focus mode and press OK to see the available focus modes. Now, choose the desired focus mode and press OK again, and now you can start shooting with your desired focus mode. Now, let us learn a little more about the AF area modes. First of all, the single point AF area mode, in which the photographer has the liberty to choose the focus area. The dynamic area AF is used for subjects in motion. The photographer here has the liberty to choose from 9, 21 and 39 focus areas. In the 3D tracking mode, the camera tracks moving subjects and selects the focus area automatically. In the auto area AF, the camera detects the subject type and automatically selects the focus area from among 39 focus points. Now, let us see how to choose an autofocus area mode on the camera. To do that, first press the I button on your camera and highlight the present AF area mode. Then press OK to bring up the AF area modes available on the camera. Now, you can select the desired AF area mode and press OK. Now, you are ready to shoot. We have spoken about various focus and focus area modes. Now, let us understand what is focal length. Technically speaking, focal length denotes the distance of the front element of the lens to the sensor. I know this is a bit technical, but to understand this better, let us go through a series of images. In this series of images, we have kept the distance between the subject and the camera constant. The only thing that we varied is the focal length. You will see through these images that how varying the focal length changes the image. The shorter the focal length, the greater the extent of the scene captured by the lens. On the other hand, the longer the focal length, the smaller the extent captured by the lens. If the same subject is photographed from the same distance, its apparent size will decrease as the focal length gets shorter and increase as the focal length gets longer. In the previous set of images, you saw how varying the focal length changed the picture angle. Now, let us see another set of images where when we change the distance between the camera and the subject, how it changes the perspective. In these photographs, we change the distance between the camera and the subject so that the subject always appears to be of the same size. Note the difference in balance between the portrait subject and the building in the background. The wider the lens, the greater the apparent distance to the building. Thank you for watching this tutorial. We hope you enjoyed it. But stay tuned for the next session where we talk about white balance, raw images and in-camera editing. So until then, this is your Nikon buddy Rohan signing off.
How can I produce images with natural looking colors? How can I capture images in RAW format? Can I edit my images in my camera?
Hello everybody, welcome to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. In the previous session, we spoke about focus and focal length. In this session, we will be talking about white balance, raw images and in-camera editing. Now, the white balance setting in your camera is used to adjust the color so that it matches the color of the light source and white objects appear white. Auto white balance is recommended for most light conditions in P, S, A or M modes, and they can be changed depending on the color of the light source if needed. For example, if you were outdoors on a brightly lit sunny day, you could use the direct sunlight white balance setting. If you were outdoors on a cloudy day, you could use the cloudy setting. If you were under the influence of fluorescent or incandescent lights, you could use the incandescent or fluorescent setting. Under the influence of shade, you can use the shade setting of white balance to match the color of the light source. Now, that was about white balance. Let's talk a little about the RAW format. We often get this question from our viewers that why not shoot JPEG instead of RAW, whereas while shooting JPEG, you can shoot a lot more images and in lesser space. Well, let me tell you, the RAW format is actually an uncompressed and unprocessed format and is the best output from your camera, whereas JPEG is a processed image. Another advantage of RAW files over JPEG are that they can be converted again and again without loss of data or quality. RAW format can be used for specific images which have a great archival value or are needed for future storage. Now, let's have a look at these two images on the screen. The JPEG image, which is a processed image, has very little scope for post-processing. If we try and post-process a JPEG image, we might lose picture quality. Whereas in a RAW image, we can manipulate the exposure up to 2 stops. We can change the white balance or post-process it how we like, as we desire. Having talked about the benefits of shooting in RAW, here is another great feature that Nikon cameras offer you is in-camera editing. Nikon cameras give you the capability of editing your images within the camera itself using the retouch menu. To access the retouch menu on the camera, press the menu button and then scroll down using the multi-selector key to the retouch menu. In the retouch menu, you have many options like delighting, red eye reduction, you can even crop your images. And another interesting effect is monochrome. You can change your images to black and white. To do so, select the monochrome using the multi-selector key, press towards the right and you get into the menu options where it gives you 3 choices: black and white, sepia and cyanotype. Choose the effect you like, press OK. It takes you to the next menu where it helps you choose the image that you would like to turn to black and white. Choose the image and press OK. If you like the effect, press OK to save the image. Now, it does not destroy the original image, but saves a copy of the same image. So that way your RAW file is protected and you also get a black and white copy of the same image. Suppose you wanted to adjust the color balance of your image. Again, you can use the retouch menu. To access the retouch menu, press the menu button, go to the retouch menu and choose the option color balance. After you choose color balance, press OK and it will take you to the menu where you can choose the picture that you'd like to change. After selecting the picture, it will show you a color chart. You can shift the slider using the multi-selector key to change the color balance, and once you have achieved the effect, just press OK to save. Again, it saves only the copy, it does not destroy the original file, and you have a copy of your color balance adjusted image. Using the retouch menu, you can also process your raw files. Let us see how to do that. Press the menu button again to go to the retouch menu. In the retouch menu, scroll down to the NEF raw processing option. NEF stands for Nikon electronic format, which is the format for raw files in Nikon cameras. Once you press OK on the NEF processing option, it takes you to a menu where you choose the raw file that you would like to process. Press OK again and it will take you to the raw processing option. Over here you can adjust the white balance, you can adjust the exposure and also change the picture control to vivid if you would like the pictures to be more saturated, standard or even monochrome. After you have made your desired changes to the raw file, you can go ahead and press execute. Once you press execute, it processes the changes and gives you a JPEG copy of the raw file. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next session where we talk about some important camera controls and menus. Until then, this is your Nikon buddy Rohan signing off.
What are all these buttons on my DSLR for? Can I customize few buttons as per my need? When and how to use these buttons?
Hello everyone, welcome to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. In the previous session, we spoke about white balance, raw format and in-camera editing. In this session, we will be talking about important camera controls and menus. We often find people overwhelmed with the number of buttons on a DSLR. In this session, we will be telling you about these buttons and their functions. First button that we have is the exposure compensation button, which is a small plus minus button right next to the shutter button on the camera. This button helps you adjust the exposure on your camera. All you have to do is press the plus minus button and rotate the command dial. If you rotate it towards the positive side, you will make the picture brighter, and if you rotate it towards the negative side, you will make the picture darker. This way you can use the exposure compensation button to adjust the brightness in your image. There will be many a times when the light will be less and you would need to illuminate the scene. For such times, use the built-in flash on your camera. To pop up the built-in flash on the camera, just press this button which has a lightning bolt made on it, which is the flash button. Once you press that, the flash will pop up and you can take a picture using the flash and illuminate the scene. The camera also offers you various flash modes. To change the flash mode, press the I button and use the command dial to choose out of fill flash, red eye reduction, slow sync and rear sync. You can also increase or decrease the power of the flash by compensating the flash. To compensate the flash, press the I button and select the flash compensation button in the information display. Once you select that, press OK and you would see that the next menu shows that you can increase the power by 1 stop and decrease it by 3 stops. Now let's talk about the function button on the camera. Presently I am using a D50-300 and the function button on this camera is placed right under the flash button. Function button is actually a free button that you could assign to any function that you frequently need. To do so, press the menu button, go to the custom settings menu. In the custom settings menu, go to F controls and choose F1. Press OK and it gives you a list of options like image quality, ISO, white balance, active delighting and many more. Choose the option that you would like to assign your function button to and press OK. The AEL and AFL button is placed at the back of the camera, right next to the I button on the D50-300. You can use this button to lock the exposure or focus or both together. The diopter adjustment control is placed right next to the viewfinder on the camera. The diopter adjustment controller helps you set the power of the viewfinder according to the power of your eyesight, so you really don't have to use your spectacles while taking images. Now coming to the release mode button, this button determines how the camera shutter is released. To access the release mode settings, on the D50-300 you have a dedicated button. All you have to do is press this button and it will bring up the release mode options. You can choose out a single frame, low, high, a self-timer option, or if you would like to release the shutter with a remote, you have two remote options as well. In cameras like the D3200 and D5200, you can access the same options by pressing the I button and going to the release mode option and choosing similar options. We talked about some important buttons and controls on the camera. Now let's move ahead towards menu functions. The first function that we would discuss is image quality and image size. To access this menu, press the menu option and go to shooting menu. Select image quality, and here you can select out of NEF RAW and JPEG options. You also have options for shooting an NEF RAW file with a JPEG file depending on the quality of the JPEG, like fine, normal and basic. Now the second function I would like to talk about is the picture control. To access this function, again we will press the menu button, go to the shooting menu and select picture control. In the picture control, you have many options like standard, neutral, vivid, monochrome or portrait and landscape options. You can choose the desired option and press OK to apply the changes to the image. Now the auto ISO sensitivity is a great function. It enables your camera to choose an ISO setting or boost an ISO when the user or the photographer is unsure of the ISO settings. To access this function, we will press the menu button, go to the shooting menu and then to ISO sensitivity settings. In the ISO sensitivity settings, we will choose auto ISO sensitivity control and switch it to on. We can also set the maximum level to which the camera can boost the ISO. Once we have chosen the appropriate level, we press OK and we are ready to shoot. Another great function that Nikon cameras offer is active delighting. Now active delighting brings back details in shadow as well as brighter areas in high contrast situations. To access this function, we will press the menu button, go to the shooting menu and choose active delighting. Depending on the lighting condition, we can choose out of low, normal, high and extra high. Once you have chosen the right level, press OK and you're ready to shoot. Now we've talked about buttons and menu functions and how we can use them to customize our camera settings to our liking. But if you would ever like to return back to the standard settings, you could do it very easily by resetting the shooting menu. To do the same, press the menu button, go to the shooting menu and choose reset shooting menu. Once you press OK, you will get an option to confirm your selection, press yes and your shooting menu is back to the standard settings. Thank you for watching this tutorial. We hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next tutorial where we talk about compositions. Until then, this is your Nikon buddy Rohan signing off.
How can I capture images that make great impact? What's really so interesting about composition? Are there some guidelines in the initial stage of photography?
So if you had all those queries about what to include in an image, what to exclude or how to frame an image, this session answers them all. Welcome to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. In the previous session, we spoke about important camera controls and menus. In this session, we'll be talking about composition. Composition is how you frame your image. There are a few guidelines that you can follow which will make your images more interesting and engaging. Now talking about the rules of composition, let's talk about the first rule of composition, the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds states that if you were to divide your frame with two horizontal and two vertical lines and place the most interesting component of your image at the intersection of these lines, you would have achieved rule of thirds. To understand the rule of thirds better, let's look at these images on the screen. You will see that both these images fulfill the rule of thirds. Another rule of composition is balancing elements. Balancing elements deals with the visual weight of the image. To understand this rule better, let's look at a few examples. In the first image, you see the camel in the foreground is balanced by the group of people in the background. This does not make the image look tilted towards one side. In the second image, you see the similar thing happening, where you see the camel chariot in the front is balanced by the camel chariot in the back, and this also gives you a visually balanced image. Now let's talk about framing. Framing deals with what to include or what to exclude in our image. It also gives us guidelines of using natural elements or surroundings to our advantage or as a frame in our image. Let's look at the first image to understand this better. In the first image, we see how we have used the arch of a doorway to encapsulate and frame a monument. In the second image, you will see how we've used different elements to frame this image, like the branches of the trees on the sides, the trees on the hill, the mountains in the background, and the clouds in the sky. All these components together give this image a cinematic feel. Another rule of composition is leading lines. With the use of leading lines in images, we draw the viewer's attention into the image or towards a specific portion of the image. Let's have a look at the first example, where we have used the walls of this passage to draw the viewer's attention towards the building in the background. In the second image, we use the road as a leading line into the image, which draws the viewer's attention towards the hills and the clouds. In composition, viewpoint talks about how changing different camera angles can change the perspective of an image. Like if you were to take a picture of a child playing from up here, you would probably dwarf the child. So it is advisable to go down to the eye level of the child and then take a picture. In the first image, you see that we've chosen to actually go sit down on the ground and take this image from a very low perspective. This gives the monument a larger than life feel. Talking about another rule of composition, into the frame. Into the frame talks about leaving positive space in the direction in which your subject is either looking or moving. If you look at the first image, we have a man which is looking towards the right, and so we have left positive space on the right side of the image. If we go to the second image, you would see that we have left positive space towards the left of the image, because that is the direction in which the horse is moving. Thank you for watching this tutorial. We hope you enjoyed this session on composition. Stay tuned for some more interesting videos coming your way. Until then, this is your Nikon buddy Rohan signing off.
What does Nikon DSLR has to offer me? What is guide mode? What are the advantages of having active delighting, HDR and inbuilt time-lapse option in Nikon DSLRs?
If you have all these queries and questions, this session will answer all of them. Welcome everyone to another session of Nikon DSLR tutorials. Today I am going to share some information about advantages of having a Nikon DSLR camera. Now Nikon DSLR camera come equipped with a lot of photography features that can enhance your photography skills. So let's see these features one by one. One of the most important feature of Nikon DSLR is the F mount. Now when we talk about F mount, I'll just show you how F mount looks like. Now here you can see this ring. This ring is known as F mount. Now this ring gives you the consistency to mount any lens onto this camera. So if you have a very old Nikon lens, you can mount that lens on this camera. You can even mount all kind of new Nikon lenses on this camera. This F mount is the very reason why Nikon have such a huge loyal customer base, because of the consistency we provide in our products. Now one of the most unique feature of Nikon DSLR is the guide mode. Now this guide mode is a feature incorporated in Nikon DSLR like Nikon D3200 and Nikon D3100. With the help of this mode, you just have to rotate the dial to the guide mode on the camera, and once you do that, you will see a tutorial onto your screen. Now this tutorial helps all those photographers who are first time DSLR owners and want to learn photography. This mode helps you to learn the kind of settings required in respective lighting situations. Now to understand better, let's see an example of a guide mode. Now as you can see, most of the people who buy DSLR are tempted to get those portrait shot with a shallow depth of field. And why? Because it gives a very cinematic view to your image. Now in order to do that, you have to play around with the aperture. That means your f number should be lower, close to f4 or f3.5. As clearly mentioned, with the help of this guide mode, it's stating that choose lower f numbers to blur the background. This means it is telling you to drop your f number in order to get the blur background. As you do that, you will see the background is changing and it is giving you more defocused background. This is how guide mode helps you in one particular situation. Now these kind of features and these kind of instructions can be used from the guide mode to learn other aspects of photography. Another unique advantage of Nikon DSLR is active delighting feature. Now this feature is there in all Nikon DSLR cameras. Now in order to access this feature, you just first need to go to menu options, and in menu options go to shooting menu. In shooting menu you will find this feature called active delighting. In some cameras you will just see active delighting off and on. In some cameras you will find various levels of active delighting, that is normal, high and extra high. Depending on the lighting situation, you choose the active delighting and grab an image. Now let's see with the help of the example how active delighting works. Now here is an image that has been shot without using active delighting. Now you can see in the shadow areas there are no details. Even in the clouds you won't find any kind of detail. The image also doesn't look very colorful because the saturation is very low. Now in this kind of situation you just need to switch on your active delighting and click an image. Once you do that, you will see a drastic change in your image. There are a lot of details in the sky, even the details in the shadow areas have just popped up. Now this is a very good feature that can be utilized in various kind of scenarios, like for this landscape shot. Now the utility of active delighting is just not confined to these kind of images. You can use active delighting in various kind of scenarios, like for example while grabbing an image in wildlife situation. Now in most of the wildlife situation you will find animals or birds under the influence of shade. You just have to switch on active delighting to get proper exposure of that particular subject. Similarly, if you are shooting a backlit portrait wherein the sunlight or the light is coming from the back side of the subject, normally you get an underexposed shot. Now in order to get a properly exposed image, you just need to switch on active delighting. This is a very good feature and it's there in all our Nikon DSLR cameras. Another unique feature that I personally like in Nikon DSLR is the HDR feature. This feature is very unique. You just need to access the shooting menu. You will find this feature called HDR. Now what is the meaning of HDR? HDR simply means high dynamic range. To explain you much more in detail, let us talk about what is high dynamic range. Normal human eye dynamic range is very good because you can see details in the shadow areas as well as in the brighter areas. Similarly, to achieve same kind of output from your camera, you just need to switch on the HDR feature of your camera. Let us understand with the help of this image how HDR feature functions. Now you can see this image which is a landscape shot and which has been shot without HDR feature switched on. Here you cannot see any kind of details in the clouds as well as the landscape. The exposure is also not very good. Now if you just switch on the HDR feature of your camera and click an image, you will see all the details in the clouds as well as in the landscape have just popped up. Even the exposure is evenly spread all across the frame. This is a very unique feature and this will give you a very close perspective of the reality. This is how you see things in real if you actually present in the scene. Now why I like this HDR feature? The reason I like this feature is because when I used to shoot HDR images earlier, I used to shoot at various different exposures and then used to combine all those images together in a post-processing software, which is in turn a very time consuming process. Now with the help of HDR feature, you just need to go to shooting menu, just switch on this feature and grab an image. Camera will take two different exposure and combine both these images together and give you an HDR output. How unique is that? Now you must have seen those high quality time-lapse footages of clouds moving very fast or traffic moving very fast on various documentary channels. Now in order to grab those kind of videos, earlier you need to mount a camera, then you have to roll a camera for a very long duration and then take that footage on a video editing software and start post processing. This is a very time consuming and tedious process. With Nikon camera, you just have to go to shooting menu. There is an option called inbuilt time-lapse photography. You just have to put in the right settings as per the lighting situation and as per the subject you are shooting and just press OK. Camera will start shooting images at regular interval and by the end of the time, it will compile a high quality full HD time-lapse footage for you. How unique is that? Now this is the kind of camera that you would love to carry both for stills as well as for recording time-lapse footages. Here is an example of high quality time-lapse footage taken from various Nikon DSLR cameras. What if you want to record a video along with stills? Now in order to do that, earlier you need to carry two different cameras, one a video camera for video recording and for still photography a DSLR. Now today Nikon DSLRs have offered you full HD video capability inside the camera. In order to do that, you just need to go to shooting menu and choose the movie settings you want to shoot in. Like for example, Nikon offers various kind of settings for full HD video like 1080p at 60 fps, 1080p at 30 fps, 24 fps and 25 fps. The quality of full HD movie recorded on a DSLR is so good that even today most of the production houses and filmmakers are using DSLR for making films and documentaries. So a full HD capability in your DSLR offers you a very good quality. To see that what kind of quality a DSLR has to offer, let's see a video footage that has been shot using Nikon DSLRs. As you have seen this high quality footage recorded by Nikon DSLR, you must be wondering, even my smart device offers full HD video capability at 1080p. Now remember, DSLR is a very unique machine. It has a very big sensor as compared to your smart device. That means full HD movie recorded on a DSLR will give you more details and more data in terms of video quality. So DSLR Full HD movie cannot be compared with the movie recorded by any other smart devices. The movie recorded by a DSLR is of very high quality. Even the video that you are watching right now has been shot using Nikon DSLRs. Inbuilt HDR, inbuilt time lapse, full HD movie capability, these are just few of the features that Nikon DSLR offers. We have a lot more advantages to offer in Nikon DSLRs, but for the time being, if you practice these key features, that will definitely enhance your creativity and photography skills. Until next time, this is your Nikon buddy Abhishek Singh signing off.